So just to be clear, the New World Order is not some amorphous organization of crazy, scary people in black robes. It is a loosely organized group of rich people trying to maintain the monopoly on fractional reserve banking and leverage it to control the world. And that New World Order is the New World Order I'm interested in bringing down. And if you're with me, we need to start paying attention together. Hey guys, JC in the woods here. We are at 1,324,000 people infected around the world and roughly 73,000 people dead. So the novel coronavirus is still on a good, strong march around the world and through humanity. As we've been walking in the woods together, these stories from the wilderness have revolved around the New World Order. And historically speaking, the New World Order is kind of this comical web of unnamed and named entities that nobody really understands, like the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations. But in reality, these are all very crude masks which conceal a monopoly on fractional reserve banking. And it's this monopoly that I would like to break with this channel. It is this monopoly that I'm trying to expose, and it's the information about this monopoly that I'm going to try and bring to you with these stories from the wilderness. So what are these private equity firms that I want to talk about today? Well, private equity firms are essentially weaponized mountains of money. Weaponized to be used to buy and leverage companies. Oh.
Hi.
They've been weaponized to control corporations by holding the majority stock. In fact, these companies own about $5 trillion worth of corporations in the United States. That's about 1/6 of all the public holdings in the United States. And actually, there are more private equity companies than there are publicly held corporations in America right now. So the deal is that these corporations that are controlled by private equity firms behave as though they are responsible for a return to their stockholders. And we are left thinking that their stockholders are just average people like you and me, but with a little more money. And in actuality, they're not. Their stockholders are not people. Their stockholders are private equity firms, giant weaponized mountains of money. And these giant weaponized mountains of money are now asking for their subsidiary firms, those firms which they have predated on, to be bailed out. And they themselves would like to be bailed out. And what do they want to be bailed out for? So that they can have government guaranteed loans, gamble with those guaranteed loans, and then give the losses to us as taxpayers. That's their plan. And we need to stop that plan. We need to be awake enough so that we can stop that plan. So private equity firms, these weaponized mountains of money, why are they so bad? Well, let's take a look at a couple examples in Pennsylvania, and then we'll see if what they do is really for the best interests of the community they're in, or if they're just into enriching themselves. Well, first of all, by definition, these weaponized mountains of money are only made for one thing, and that is to make more money. So by definition, what they do is that they buy a company, they might split it up into a couple subsidiaries and sell one of those and borrow against the remaining assets of the company they still own. After they've borrowed and leveraged against the company's assets, then they'll remove that value from the company, leaving behind nothing but a husk, allowing that company to either fail or succeed at its own will, but being legally insulated from the financial consequences of their decisions by scraping off the top this massive profit that they've generated through this leveraging and through this sort of buyout program. They basically buy things cheap and sell them expensive, and they try to find things that are underpriced and buy them and then leverage them in such a way to make massive profit. Not for anyone in particular, and certainly not for the shareholders of that company, but rather for the private equity firm itself. This is the kind of thing that was really glorified and glamorized in the movie Pretty Woman a long time ago. But actually, these firms have come to dominate capitalism as we know it in America. So Cerberus Capital owns a hospital in Pennsylvania that they threatened to shut down recently in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. They threatened to shut it down if the state of Pennsylvania wouldn't absorb $24 million in debt. That's just one example. Another example is a hospital that was purchased in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia in 2018 for destruction and eventual construction of luxury apartments. Those luxury apartments haven't been built yet, and the hospital stands vacant. When Philadelphia requested that we use this hospital for the upcoming coronavirus pandemic, the owner of this hospital, another capital private equity firm, another weaponized mountain of money, demanded $1 million per month in rent. Finally, it might not be known to you, but actually physicians and nurses oftentimes work through a staffing company rather than for the hospitals themselves. These staffing companies are also often owned by private equity firms. And in the cases of the current coronavirus, what's happening is that, one, hospitals have stopped doing the scheduled procedures, which are their bread and butter, is where they make all their money, and instead they're preparing for the coronavirus pandemic. And what this has caused is empty beds. And these empty beds are not cheap. So these cost-cutting, profit-oriented companies have decided to cut the hours of physicians and cut the hours of nurses and specifically cut their pay. This has resulted in a lot of pain for the healthcare workers that are on the front line of this fight. And this is happening now by private equity firms who are at the same time also asking for exceptions to rules so that they can partake in the multi-trillion-dollar bailout currently going on via the Federal Reserve. This we need to stop. So long story short, we need to change the regulations that surround these companies, and we need to change the legal framework behind which they hide and behind which they profit. We definitely need to make sure that our corrupt Congress is at least monitored enough so that we know how much money is dealt out to these firms. Ideally, we would be in control of our Congress, and we could make phone calls that would prevent that from happening. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that is beyond our control. Instead, the only alternative that we have is to pay very close attention to how much money is given out, what firms receive this money, and how this money is then used and leveraged to further destroy our society, so that eventually we can call these people to account. The blog which is responsible for this report is linked below. I highly recommend reading it. The author is a very interesting writer and also very educated in terms of how the stock market is leveraging the monopoly on fractional reserve banking to really steal the wealth of America. If you liked it, like and subscribe. Please read the blog that's linked below, and I'll see you next time in the woods.